Welcome to Step 1, Nutrition. Very important topic, big topic. We're splitting this up into two sections. Step 1A is going to be nutrition principles, and then step 1B is going to be nutrition plan, where we put everything into practice. Outline today, we're going to talk about a little bit of historical context so we understand the current state of affairs, and then we're going to get practical right away with goals of good nutrition guidelines, and FAQs. So some historical context here. We'll start with this man by the name of Dr. Weston Price, who was a dentist that was practicing in America in the early 1900s. Dr. Price performed the greatest nutritional study of all time that will never be repeated. He was curious why so many of his patients had very poor dental health and very poor physical health, and that didn't seem normal to him. And he wanted to see if he could go around the world and discover groups of people that were healthy, that were free of the modern chronic diseases that he was seeing. So he traveled all over the world. It took him 10 years. These are all the places that he went. And in each place, he was able to perform an interesting experiment. He looked at two groups of people within the same location. One group was living in cities and had access to the industrial food, because this was the birth of the globalized industrial modern food movement. So he was able to study the people that were living in cities that had access to the modernized food and compare them to the same group of people, the same ethnic group that was living out of the city in the countryside, not exposed to the industrial food, living off the land as they had done for hundreds to thousands of years. So he was able to see in the same genetic pool, the same ethnic pool of people, what would happen if you ate the industrial food versus you ate traditional food. And what he found consistently across the board is the people living off the land, eating the traditional food, had incredible health, incredible dental health. None of these individuals had any modern dentistry whatsoever. No cavities, perfectly straight teeth, and very, very robust physical health. The people living in cities all over the world that were eating the modern industrialized food had very, very poor dental health. They were susceptible to acute issues. They were susceptible to chronic developmental problems. And what he did was he analyzed the food from a nutritional perspective that these different groups were eating. And what he found was really shocking. Here are all the groups that he studied, and this is the percentage greater of nutritional density of these vitamins and minerals that these traditional groups were getting compared to the modern industrialized diets. 1,000% increase in the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. That's 10 times the amount of A, D, E, and K that people eating the Western modernized foods were getting. And same with calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, iron, huge percentage increases in the nutritional density. So there's a few conclusions that we can draw from this study. Number one, optimal health is not only possible, but it's our natural state. If you eat the food off the land, live as nature intended, you will be vibrantly healthy. Number two, disease is not genetic, but it's environmental. Environmental means it's something that you're being exposed to. It's not inherent. It's something in your surroundings. And that brings us to number three, that good nutrition is one of the primary drivers of health and disease. And he could prove that with the difference of concentrations and nutrients that he observed in the different food that he analyzed. And it's only gotten worse, because what's happened over the last 100 years is a huge decline in the vitamin and mineral content of our food due to over-farming, use of synthetic fertilizers that don't really enrich the soil appropriately, long transit times for food, etc. So you can see the percentage drop in these different minerals over 80 years with an apple. Just one example, and this only goes up to 1992. It's probably gotten worse than that. At the same time, we've had this huge boom of industrial food. This is showing the consumption of vegetable oil, which is just absolutely skyrocketed. This is a graphic that shows how seed oils are made. And you can see it's so far from nature. It's so toxic what's created that we want to stay as far away from this as humanly possible. We can see the rise in glyphosate concentrations that have been used in America from 1992 to 2019. This is with the advent of Roundup Ready crops, Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soy. Roundup is glyphosate. Glyphosate causes leaky gut. It causes cancer. And we're all getting bombarded with this stuff in America. And a big rise in pesticide fungicide, insecticide, and herbicide use. On top of that, we have a huge influx of food chemicals into our food system. There's more than 10,000 chemicals that are allowed in the American food system compared to something like 300 to 400 in the EU. One of the reasons why that is because of this GRAS loophole, which stands for generally recognized as safe. This is a loophole that was passed via lobbyists in 2000 that allowed chemical companies to decide for themselves whether or not a product was deemed safe or not without safety testing. So it's created a gold rush of food chemicals into the food system, and 99% of food chemicals that have been introduced into the market since 2000 have come through this loophole, which means they haven't been safety tested at all. And you can see the comparison of the United States version of products and the UK version of the exact same products and how much more toxic the American product is. So that just gives you a little context about what we're dealing with. Now, the goals that we're going to go over of good nutrition are designed to deal with the modern problems that we face. And I want to start off with this point. Good nutrition should not be based around theories, rules, and dogmas, which is what the vast majority of diets that are in our culture that are promoted are based off of. Paleo diet, keto diet, vegan diet. These are all rigid diets that are based on theories about where we came from and what we should eat and dogmas and rules and restrictions. We want to get away from all of that. And instead, a nutritional paradigm around historical wisdom, like the wisdom of Weston Price and his studies, physiological principles of how the body actually functions in real life, and personal experience, which is how you feel eating certain foods and figuring out what works for you as an individual. So there's 4 goals of good nutrition that we're going to discuss. Avoiding toxic exposure, raising the metabolic rate, providing all the required macro and micronutrients, and supporting good gut function. All of the cultures that Weston Price studied all had these 4 pieces in play. Number 1, avoid toxic exposure. This is very obvious and straightforward. We need to exit the modern medical matrix and get away from all the industrial food, the chemicals, the pesticides, the vegetable oils that we just talked about. The easiest way to think about this is avoiding packaged foods. Anything that's in a package is processed by definition and is highly suspect. There's, of course, some packaged foods that are fine. Most are not. And cutting out packaged foods and moving to eating whole foods that you prepare yourself, homemade, is the ultimate health hack. If you do that, you bypass so much of the industrialized toxins that we're being exposed to. And when I say industrial food, what do I mean? Seed oils, white flour, soy, factory farmed animal food that's pumped with hormones and antibiotics, conventional produce that they use heavy chemical pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, GMOs. The glyphosate contamination is so bad in our country that 80% of organic produce is still contaminated with glyphosate. That's how crazy that is. The worst offenders are the Dirty Dozen, which is released by the Environmental Working Group. You can look that up. So you got to do the best that you can to get the cleanest stuff that you can to avoid these toxic chemicals. Number 1 choice is a farmer's market, but do the best you can to source the highest quality products, and we're going to give you a lot of resources as to how to do that. Number 2, raise the metabolic rate. Healing is energy, and nutrition is designed to give your body the energy that it needs to heal. That's what our diets are supposed to do. And so many diets, like the keto diet, like the vegan diet, there's no consideration whatsoever for the energy that the food is imparting to the body. So these are some principles of what we call pro-metabolic eating or bioenergetic eating that was popularized by Dr. Ray Peat, and this is inspired by him. Carbs. Carbs means sugars and starches. Those both go into the carb category. Carbs are the primary cellular fuel source of the body. I don't care what anyone else says in the keto movement or anything else, that's how the body works. And most people need carbs to function and be healthy and feel their best. So carbs should be part of the diet to increase the energy. Saturated fats over unsaturated fats. Saturated fats raise the metabolic rate. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature. Coconut oil, butter, tallow, palm oil, chocolate, etc. We want to eat more of those and less of the unsaturated fats, particularly the PUFAs, the polyunsaturated fats, the seed oils, the nuts and seeds, things that are liquid at room temperature. Okay? High calcium over phosphorus. A lot of foods are very, very high in phosphorus content, And that disrupts our calcium phosphorus ratio, which has huge implications on our metabolic rate. So you want to decrease super high phosphate foods like grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, and increase high calcium foods, dairy, sardines, green leafy vegetables, protein, particularly animal protein. Most people that we work with one-on-one are not eating enough protein. Protein is a building block to all of your cells, all your tissues in the body. You need enough protein to function well. 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight. That is around 80 to 120 grams daily of protein. And you want to have a good balance of amino acids. So you want to balance the muscle meat with things like collagen, gelatin, and bone broth that have the amino acids that are missing from the muscle meat to get a nice complete protein. And we'll talk about collagen and gelatin more in a bit. And then finally, eating 3 balanced meals a day to balance your blood sugar. A combination of proteins, carbs, and fat when you eat a meal, including snacks. We're not a fan of intermittent fasting because intermittent fasting puts pressure on the metabolism. And when your blood sugar drops, cortisol is released, it's stressful, and it lowers your metabolic rate. The vast majority of normal human beings should eat 3 meals a day. And you should have, a reasonable fasting window, like a 10-14 split, 10 hours eating, 14 hours fast, or a 12-12, but nothing like the crazy intermittent fasting where you're going till noon, not eating anything. It's too stressful. We want to increase the energy of the body by eating consistently, getting our calories up, keeping the blood sugar stable. Okay? Goal number 3, provide all the required nutrients. Remember that chart that shows what percentage greater the traditional cultures were eating those vitamins and minerals compared to 20th century Western diets. Think about it this way. Nutritional deficiencies create metabolic bottlenecks in the system because we need vitamins and minerals for normal cellular function. They're used for enzymatic pathways and our overall metabolism and making energy. If you have an assembly line where stage B is operating at 20% capacity compared to stage A and stage C, it doesn't matter how well A and C are running. 20% bottleneck at B is going to slow down the entire system. That's what deficiencies do. So we need to make sure that we're getting all of our vitamins and minerals from the food that we're eating. And we recommend trying your best to get your nutrients from food and not relying on supplements. Supplements can be very helpful. It's a whole module that we're going to talk about, but you want to get as much nutrient density from your food because nutrients in your food are way better absorbed, much higher quality. Okay, so you want to design your meals around protein and around micronutrients. Every time you eat something, whether it's a meal or a snack, you say, where's the protein and where are the micronutrients? And that will help to steer you in the right direction. As a rule of thumb, animal foods have the highest micronutrient density by far compared to plant foods. Eggs, raw dairy, liver, meat, oysters, seafood, super high amounts of fat-soluble vitamins, B vitamins, minerals. Okay. And lastly, number 4, support gut function. If the gut's not working well, we can't absorb. If we can't absorb, we're not getting the nutrients that we need from our diet. And we create inflammation and toxicity in the gut that creates inflammation in the body when our gut's not functioning properly. So supporting good gut function helps with keeping the body detoxified. We're going to talk a lot about that in upcoming modules and getting all the nutrients that you need. Okay. So eating hygiene is just the process of how you eat, chewing your food to the consistency of applesauce, sitting down and only eating and not multitasking, not eating on the run, not eating in the car or at work, slowing down, breathing. That is going to put you in a parasympathetic state that's going to help you to digest. If you just did this, it could literally transform your gut function. That's how important it is. We can also use specific digestive support from supplementation, but even from apple cider vinegar, a little splash in water before meals can help the stomach acid, or bitters, which is a traditional remedy for increasing the stomach acid. So we can provide digestive support. And then from a nutritional perspective, we want to decrease foods that are hard on the gut and increase foods that are supportive to the gut. So hard to digest foods are what we call bird food. Grains, beans, nuts, and seeds contain phytic acids, hard to digest, not very nutrient dense. We want to limit these foods. And then cooking helps the digestive process, especially with vegetables. This is just a rule of thumb. Some people do fine with raw vegetables, but most people do better when vegetables and food in general is cooked. It's like pre-digesting it. Eating simple meals with whole ingredients. Everyone bloats from a Chipotle burrito bowl. It's got every single food group in it, right? That's hard on the GI. And it's not traditional. No one in traditional society ever ate a meal like that. It was much more simple preparations, and that's easier for the gut, okay? And then finally, using antiseptic fibers to bind toxins. We're going to talk about examples of what that means. These are foods that help to cleanse the gut, improve the microbiome, decrease endotoxin, and improve bowel movements. So we're going to get into some specific guidelines here. A couple quotes to start us off. The true method of knowledge is experiment. William Blake. Nutrition is a self-experiment to figure out what works for you. So these are guidelines, okay? And you have to apply it, see what happens. And then from Dr. Ray Peat, the proportion of proteins, carbohydrates, and fat, it probably should be something like 1/3 of each, but I'm not sure what the ideal is. It depends so much on the quality of each of them. Avoid starch and avoiding eating polyunsaturated fats and avoiding the very high tryptophan content proteins, then you could go very high in any one of the major nutrients without problem. What he's saying here is if you eat clean, unadulterated food that's easy to digest and pro-metabolic, we don't have to worry too much about macros. So don't stress about it. A lot of people stress about how much of these things that you should eat. Just think about it in simple, general terms. Protein, a moderate amount, getting that 80 to 120 gram amount. Carbs, moderate to high. It's your cell's primary fuel source. Different people have different metabolic responses to carbs. Some people are going to do better with high amounts. Some people more moderate amounts. Fat, moderate to low, depending on how you do with them. Okay. So let's talk about protein. Serving size, protein for every meal. You don't want to eat anything without protein because it helps to balance your blood sugar and give your body the energy that it needs. When we say protein, we mean animal protein. Meats, organ meats, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, collagen, and bone broth. Collagen powder is one of the easiest hacks to increase protein to help the balance of the amino acids, because collagen contains those amino acids that are not found really anywhere else. So I definitely recommend consuming collagen daily as a way of getting your protein up. And then superfood supplements, liver and oysters. These two foods are better than hundreds of dollars of supplements. They're basically like multivitamins. Vitamin A, B vitamins, minerals, super high amounts in nature's greatest form you could ever ask for. So eating these once a week, if you could find a way to incorporate them into your diet. With liver, the easiest way is through ancestral blends of meat, or you could do liver pate or liverwurst. With oysters, a raw oyster happy hour deal would be great at a bar, or smoked canned oysters, my favorite. I eat these once or twice a week. Super easy snack or meal. Additional proteins that people don't think about are mushrooms and potatoes. These are like the best plant proteins. Way better, by the way, than beans and nuts and things that a lot of people consider to be proteins. Mushrooms and potatoes are way easier to digest and have a very high quality protein, along with other great benefits that we'll talk about. Here's a nice graphic from the War Kitchen that explains the nutrient density of oysters. Okay. Carbs, serving size. Carbs with every meal, as desired, depending on your preferences and your individual response to carbs. Again, 2 categories. If you're going to go with either category, you go with sugars. They're the easiest to digest and they're the most metabolically beneficial. Fruit, dates, honey, maple syrup, sweeteners of various kinds, orange juice, apple sauce. The fructose in the sugars enhances the cellular metabolism, it restores liver glycogen, and it regulates your blood sugar. The glycemic index, which is how high the food raises your blood sugar, is actually better with sugars than it is with starches because of the fructose. So if you tend to struggle with carbs, go with the sugars and you'll do typically better. There are good starches as well. We call them safe starches. Potatoes, rice, particularly white rice, oats, nixtamalized corn, which is processed traditionally to make it more absorbable, root vegetables like carrots, turnips, parsnips, and sourdough bread, okay? Fats, serving size as desired for cooking and for taste. For cooking, we definitely recommend using the saturated fats. Coconut oil, ghee, you could use tallow. Coconut oil is the best because it contains medium chain triglycerides that are not found in any other food. These MCTs bypass the liver, they're absorbed directly into the bloodstream, and they speed up the cellular metabolism. For dressing, olive oil, which is what we call a MUFA, monounsaturated fat, it's totally fine. We want to avoid the PUFAs. So saturated and monounsaturated are fine. Olive oil, we don't want to cook with that because it's not saturated, right? So it's good for dressing, or butter is good for dressing, chocolate for dessert. Great saturated fat, very good for you. Vegetables, serving size as desired. Cooked or fermented are usually better tolerated than raw, right? The best ones from a nutrient density perspective are leafy greens with the calcium. Colored vegetables have phytonutrients in them. That gives them the color. And sauerkraut, which has amazing probiotics, Very good for your microbiome. Antiseptic fibers. I definitely recommend that you eat one of these at least a day. I love this category of foods and makes me feel great. This comes straight out of Ray Peat's playbook. Raw carrot salad, shave it with a potato peeler, dress it with a little vinegar, olive oil, sea salt. Cooked white mushrooms, super tasty. They're basically like a condiment. You can eat them with meat, with eggs, really with anything. Or oat bran, which is similar in taste to oatmeal, super quick to cook. All of these contain fibers that pull endotoxin out of the gut. They keep things moving. They improve the microbiome. They have different chemicals that keep the bacteria in the gut at bay. I highly recommend them. I feel great off of them. And they serve as some of the cleanest and easiest fibers to consume. A lot of other fibers that come from grains, beans, and vegetables oftentimes make endotoxin worse. People will experience that as feeling bloated because it's feeding bacteria that are eating those foods and fermenting them and creating gas. A lot of people are confused why they feel bloated after a salad. That's why. But these foods, because of the antibacterial components to them, don't tend to cause that problem. Okay? Salts and seasonings. As much as you desire to taste, sea salt is super, super therapeutic. It's very anti-stress. You want to look for microplastic-free sea salt because there's a lot of microplastics in the ocean. And good organic herbs and spices, which have tons of therapeutic value in themselves. But again, you want to avoid the plastic jars that have microplastics and oftentimes stabilizers and anti-caking agents. Just go with the clean organic stuff. Beverages. You may be surprised to hear that orange juice and milk are actually more hydrating than water, right? So of course we think of mineralized spring water. We have a whole section on spring water and how to create the best water at home. But milk, kefir, milk's a superfood. Contains all the nutrients that you need to be healthy. Highly recommend it. Fruit juices, OJ, AJ, lemon water. The caffeine beverages, coffee, yerba mate, green tea, these are fine as long as they're consumed with carbs and fat, like cream and sugar in your coffee, or with a meal. Black coffee on an empty stomach is going to drop your blood sugar by speeding up your metabolic rate, and you have no calories in the tank. So you always want to have caffeinated beverages with meals. It's all individual, how you respond to them. Just don't overdo it. Hot chocolate, great saturated fats, herbal teas, kombucha, fermented beverage with good probiotics, and of course, bone broth. The limit category we've talked about. These are foods that you can eat on occasion, only if they're well tolerated. You may do fine with them, you may not. If you're having any problems, this is a category that you want to be aware of. Grains, gluten, beans, nuts, and seeds. Hard to digest, need to be prepared properly by soaking or sprouting in order to digest them properly. A lot of people have trouble with these. They're just harder to digest than all the other foods that we talked about. If you're going to go with nuts, the best nuts are macadamia nuts, which are mostly MUFA, monounsaturated fats. And then raw vegetables, as we discussed. Cooking makes it easier to digest, especially with cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage have a chemical class called goitrogens that block your thyroid function. But when you cook it, it inactivates that. So definitely cook those. And you may want to cook most of your vegetables, especially if you have GI issues, okay? And in the avoid category, we've talked about all these vegetable oils and seed oils of all kinds and fried foods, processed foods, chips, refined products of all kinds, white flour, white sugar, white table salt, devoid of nutrients and highly chemicalized and can cause problems. Factory farmed animal food, usually raised in CAFO operations, confined animal feeding lots, very unethical, very unclean, conventional non-organic and GMO produce, and boxed, packaged, and processed foods. So let's talk about some FAQs. Number one, should I avoid dairy? Everyone always asks about this. Dairy is a superfood. From a nutrient density perspective, it has all your calcium, magnesium that you need, vitamin A, D, K. It's got protein, it's got carbs, it's got fat. It's honestly a perfect food. It's really a quality issue. So you should get raw dairy if you can. We have resources on how to get that. And most people tolerate raw dairy better than store-bought dairy. And if you get store-bought dairy, you want to go for the whole, uncontaminated, no additives, low temp, pasteurized, non-homogenized, like low processed. A lot of the dairy is processed and people don't do well with that oftentimes. Dairy can be an issue for people that have lactose intolerance or dairy intolerance. We do that testing in our office. It's super beneficial. And you may have an individual problem with dairy. In that case, you should avoid it. If it causes you problems, for now, you should avoid it. But don't avoid it because of some idea in your head that humans shouldn't have milk or dairy or that it's like inflammatory, because that's just completely false. Traditional cultures have been eating dairy for hundreds to thousands of years. What about gluten? Another food that we've been eating for thousands of years, but we typically, back in the day, would ferment it into sourdough bread and eat it that way. We also used traditional varieties of wheat 100 plus years ago, and now all the modern wheat is hybridized. There's not the same varieties, and it's super high in gluten, and gluten is harder to digest. So our recommendation is to avoid gluten unless you're having traditional made sourdough bread. Shouldn't I avoid sugar and carbs? This is a totally made up myth from the ketogenic and paleo movement that believe that your blood sugar should never rise, that you're going to become insulin sensitive or insensitive, become diabetic, or that sugar feeds cancer. These are all theoretical buzz terms that aren't in alignment with physiology. Good natural sugars and carbs give the body energy, so they should be part of a good balanced diet. What if I don't do well with one of the recommended foods? Again, you have to do your own experimentation and figure out what works for you. If we're telling you a food is good, but it doesn't work for you, avoid it. If there's a food that you just don't like, you can avoid it. This is your own adventure, so you have to figure out what works for you personally. What should I eat if I'm having a lot of digestive issues? If you're having digestive issues, you should definitely avoid the limit category: grains, beans, nuts, seeds, and raw vegetables. You should be including the antiseptic fibers in your diet, the raw carrot salad, the white button mushrooms, the oat bran. Going more with the sugar category of carbs than the starch category, because sugars are much more easily digestible than the starches. And in general, having more digestible foods: bone broth, soups, stews, cooked foods. Bone broth and collagen help the gut lining. They help the absorption of our nutrients, particularly protein. And making a bone broth stew or soup, like grandma's old-fashioned chicken noodle soup, there's traditional wisdom in that. That's why it's given to people who are sick, because it's so nourishing and so easy to digest. So eating very digestible foods and simplifying everything to control the variables. Simple preparations. That's it for this video. We'll see you in step 1B.